How's it going, my true people? The DrSlaking, the Slacking Doctor, back with a brand new series on the channel. Welcome to the Draft Doctor, where I go over a draft league team or a draft that I've seen that I think is worth analysing, discussing, and maybe talking about how we could improve or why it's so good already. Now, I want to give a huge shout out to, I believe it was just Jack, a good friend of mine, Jack, who in our Truant People Discord server suggested doing a bit of a series like this, looking at people's drafts, breaking them down, analysing them. If you guys want to join the subscriber Discord server, it is linked down in the description. And if you like videos like this, please do consider subscribing and sharing them everywhere as I get my headphones tangled. So basically, yeah, this series, the idea is, I don't know how regular they're going to be yet. Maybe when a draft particularly takes my fancy, you guys can try and submit teams to me if you want. But for the most part, I'm going to try and find teams that I think there's a good chance you guys might have seen in action, because I think that makes it easier as a viewer to understand if it's a familiar kind of team. So in this particular episode, I'm going to talk about my man OG Albina and his team. His channel will be linked down in the description. I always say his name wrong, so I've probably said it wrong again. He's a really, really good guy. We don't know each other super well, but every interaction I've had with him has always been very positive. He made a video at the end of his run in the Gala Defenders League GDL, talking about how he wasn't super happy with his season. And I kind of wanted to just look at his draft and maybe have a look at why. Now, I only really remember 2 or 3 mons off his draft. I did play him in the final week. I don't remember it that well. But I remember thinking at the time I saw his draft at the start of the season, there was a problem that instantly struck me when I saw it. I haven't gone back to look at his draft again, so I am going to kind of try and freshly analyze this with you guys on the screen. So, yeah, he said that, you know, things didn't feel right in that season. My input might mean nothing, but he seems like a very good guy. I don't think he would mind us too much having a look at his team. So, let's have a look here now. We are going to have to do some screen dimensions and all that good stuff, because I haven't got this preset up, because I don't want to kind of pre-look at the team. And is that going to be clear enough for you guys? I think that's going to be pretty clear for you guys. So we're looking at Keldeo, Scissor, Dugtrio, Drapion, Rotom Mode, Talonflame, Doublade, Orbital, Rhydon, Drampa, and then the Alchemy G-Max. Now, we're not going to see a lot of G-Max in this series, because I don't like it. But we'll start off with here. So I think we can see his record, can't we? I think I don't think it's, oh, there we go, 4 and 6 this season. So, tough season for him. I believe he was the runner-up last season. So, he went from being runner-up in the league to finishing 4 and 6 and not making playoffs. So, this isn't a player who is a bad player, doesn't know what they're doing, a new player. I don't like to use the term bad player, but, you know, less experienced or whatever. This is someone who does know what they're doing. They've shown previously in previous seasons that they can play. And that was in a Gen 8 metagame, and yet, this next season they come back and they struggle a little bit. And I think often that might indicate the team. So if we look at this team, straight away there's something that I noticed round 1 or 2. He was talking a lot about this core that he picked up of Keldeo and Scissor, and how with Flip Turn this momentum core was really great, because Keldeo brings in maybe a bulky grass, maybe a bulky fairy, maybe a bulky psychic, maybe a bulky water, but let's start with those 3. They are the defensive checks to Keldeo, right? So you might see, not in this metagame, but you might see a Tapu Fini, you might see Tapu Bulu. In this metagame, you might see a Clefable, you might see a Reuniclus, and things like that want to pivot in on Keldeo. And these are things that can, Amoonguss can easily take a hit from Keldeo, Slowbro, Slowking, 2 of these as well. And then what he can do is he can Flip Turn with his Keldeo out into his Scissor, and that brings his Scissor in, and Scissor then clicks super effective U-turn on the psychic types, it clicks super effective U-turn on the grass types, and it clicks super effective bullet punch on the fairy types. So he instantly had this core which he felt gave him really, really good momentum. Different speed tiers, setup options with Swords Dance on Scissor and Calm Mind on Keldeo. So definitely there's like enough going on here, and I think these 2 as individual Pokemon are Pokemon that I think a lot of. Keldeo being able to come in on fire types for Scissor to cover that weakness is pretty nice. And Scissor being able to come in again on the Psychic and Fairies as resisted damage is pretty nice for Keldeo. So there's definitely a lot going on here that I think is interesting. One thing that instantly worries me about this is that his steel type on his team initially doesn't resist flying. So a lot of Scarf flying types might come in a Keldeo matchup, something like Scarf Braviary to be able to revenge Keldeo. He maybe struggles with that. And what's more, if they are U-turn, he maybe struggles to get his momentum back if they want to force out the Keldeo and U-turn on an incoming whatever his flying resist may be. We can see here lower down he has a Rotom Mo. Again, his electric type doesn't resist flying, which is a little bit problematic. And then finally he has the Doublade and the Rhydon. So he does patch that up eventually, and I think that was important. I think that really helps his team here. But as we get lower down, we see these picks in Talonflame, Rotom, Mo. And I think he had this idea of momentum. This idea of, alright, well, if they bring in a bulky grass on the Keldeo, I can go to Talonflame or Scissor. If they bring in the bulky water on Keldeo and I hit with a Hydro Pump, then maybe later on it won't take a bulk up Brave Bird from my Talonflame. So, you know, you're pressuring it on the special side with Keldeo and pressuring it on the physical side with Talonflame. I can see, like, the thought process going into these cores. But there's something that really, really troubled me on this team. And it's that I felt like beyond Keldeo, I guess you have the Alchemy to some extent, but beyond Keldeo, I felt like there was a distinct lack of immediate power. So, Scissor can be choice banned, and back in Gen 4, Gen 5, choice banned Scissor was fantastic. Nowadays, I feel like choice banned Scissor really kind of struggles, actually. And a lot of the things that maybe want to come in on Keldeo, like your Slowbros, like your Amoonguses, with the regen Toxapex, with the regen, they can be built in a way that they can actually take on Keldeo and Scissor together very easily. And you might say, well, he has a Dugtrio. He can therefore trap something like a Toxapex. I actually think you can bring Shed Shell Toxapex against these three and still be fine. Now, you can build like sub-CM Taunt Keldeo to break through Toxapex. There are definitely creative things you can do in building. But I think there's still a thing here, and it's something that I've noticed a lot in Gen 8, is that Gen 8, with the introduction of Heavy Duty Boots, with the introduction of Teleport, with the introduction of Cinderace, started this fetishization of pivoting. I see all this talk about momentum, all this talk about Gen 8 is the Volt turn metagame, the flip turn metagame. Let's all just pivot, 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 and never let go of offensive momentum. And Eric, my good friend Strompful, I think taught me this better than anyone once. He was watching a game of mine, and I clicked, I think it was U-turn or something with my Swellow. I think I had a Spec Swellow, and I U-turned out. And he was like, why did you U-turn with your Swellow there? It's like, well, you know, if he goes out into his Rhydon, for example, on my Spec Swellow, he's only going to take 30% from my Boomba, so I thought I would U-turn predicting that. Alright, but that's 30% he's never getting back on his Rhydon. That means he doesn't switch into you again. You know, if you do slightly more than 30%, he's not coming in again, and you're going to break through him. And I think that's the thing that people are missing in this metagame, and this is something that I felt with this team, is that the reason that momentum is so good a lot of the time, especially in Draft League, even more than the ladder, is when it gets in a wall breaker that is able to open up a hole in your opponent's defensive core. So in this case, what I felt like when I played this team, when I saw this team, and I had a rain team, so, you know, it was limited in somewhat what it can do to me, but I felt like, okay, so what, you U-turn into Specs Dramper, and you wall break with Specs Dramper? Specs Dramper's pretty prediction reliant. That's why, despite having 135 base special attack, as you can see here, oh yeah, you can see it behind my head, it's still tier 5 because it's pretty prediction reliant. You can go into Doublade, then you have to Swords Dance up, and really Doublade's better as a cleaner with Shadow Sneak. It's not the best wall breaker sometimes, but yes, you can try and do that. You can go into CM or Beetle, you go into Bulk Up or Swords Dance Talonflame, but you can hear Bulk Up, Swords Dance, CM. There's not like an instant thing beyond Specs Keldeo, Banded Scissor, maybe Banded Dugtrio, but only 100 attack isn't sensational on Dugtrio. So really your instant power comes from Keldeo and Scissor. Well, they're the two mons that you're wanting to pivot with. So if your Specs Keldeo is always clicking flip turn, when are you wall breaking? Well, I'm doing it with my Banded Scissor U-turn. That's fine, but actually, U-turn isn't a great stab. I can bring in my Steel type with leftovers on your Banded U-turn a lot of times. And yes, Scissor has base 130 attack, but U-turn's what, 80 base power? I've got leftovers. Steel types tend to be very physically bulky. You're not really breaking through me with that. And that's where I felt this team struggled a little bit, is that I felt like it was really reliant on slower setup mons to be able to do a lot. You know, Nasty Plot Rotom, Swords Dance Doublade, maybe Swords Dance Rhydon, and even these I wouldn't describe as terrific wall breakers. So the two main like cleaners on your team, Swords Dance Scissor, bullet punching through an opponent's team, Scarf Keldeo, cleaning up an opponent's team, are also your two main wall breakers. And that's where I think this team struggled, is I felt like it needed another one, just one more really, really hard hitter. So a team that I wanted to compare this to a little bit that I had previously is this team that I drafted in the UBL in Gen 7. And I want to sort of start this bit by saying I don't pretend to have all the answers. I don't pretend to know everything. And me comparing it to a team I enjoy using doesn't mean this team was better than the team that we're analyzing today. It's just me giving the example of something that I've previously used. Like, I don't want it ever to sound condescending or superior anyway. That's not the case. We have to use examples to understand things. So, sorry about the cut there, guys. I had some food in the oven that I just had to deal with. So, as I was saying, with this team, I drafted it around a lot of the same principles of the team that we've just seen, the momentum ideas that we've just seen. So, what we see is we see a momentum core here with U-turn Diggersby and U-turn Infernape. Now, the idea of this team is you basically... Diggersby brings in grass types and flying types as its primarily 2 checks, right? Ground type is its main stab with Earthquake. That's resisted by flying, or immune by flying types, resisted by grass types. Bug types to some extent, but they're less common. Levitate mons too, but, you know, that's the general gist of it. Rock types and steel types, which resist a normal stab, don't like coming in on the ground type unless they've got Levitate. And ghost types aren't that common defensively in the metagame. I actually had Cofagrigus and Palisand at different times on this draft, so I had 2 of the best defensive ghosts anyway. So really, you're looking at grass and flying types coming in. Well, if a grass type wants to come in and I U-turn out, then I bring in my Infernape and I can launch a Flare Blitz and stuff like that. So we've got a way of beating down one of the checks. If a flying type wants to come in, or a grass type, I can go out into Mega Glalie and I can fly her off. Back then, big returns, right? So in Gen 7, this was a way of forming a team around Diggersby as the pivot on 2 wall breakers to come in. Similarly, you know, things that want to come in on Infernape like Bulky Waters and stuff, it's pretty nice if they get broken down for Diggersby or Glalie, so I could run, for example, like Pasho Berry sets, which I did sometimes with Nasty Plot Focus Blast, or I could run Grass Knot sets with Nasty Plot and a Pasho Berry, and I could lure in Bulky Waters to break for these 2 to clean, and various other options. Now, one thing to really note on this team is that instantly in this momentum core, we have 2 fantastic Scarfers. So I have 2 different late game clean options. I have a mon that's really versatile in the setup with Nasty Plot or Swords Dance and Infernape, and another mon that can set up in Swords Dance here. I have a way of hazard pressure with double Spiker and Stealth Rocks here, so I can really force a field advantage with hazards. I can force a setup advantage in different ways, especially physically unpredictable ways, and I can scarf different options as well as having setup plus priority. So to go back to this team, we spoke about Swords Dance Bullet Punch. Well, I have Swords Dance Mach Punch, Nasty Plot Vacuum Wave, Swords Dance Quick Attack. So we have a bunch of options for that. So it's really just about giving yourself a ton of options. Now, what I found in using this team is that very rarely did Infernape run U-turn. The only time I really ran U-turn on Infernape is if I was running like banded sets. But one really nice thing is even if I'm running Scarf Physical Infernape with U-turn, even if we're running Scarf Diggersby with U-turn, because they are physical and fairly strong. I mean, it doesn't look it when you look at its base attack here, but if you double this base attack with huge power, Diggersby strong, and the same with Infernape, decently strong on the physical side, compared to Keldeo, which is using Flip Turn, which is a physical move with a 72 uninvested attack. You're not actually getting any chip off with Flip Turn. You're probably doing less than most grass types leftovers recovery. So again, you're not really wearing things down, and you're not getting hazards up to wear things down with your momentum core. And actually, to get your hazard setters in, it's looking pretty tough. You're really going to rely on Rhydon. And again, if your whole game plan is just to keep offensive momentum and you don't want to use the way that I like to play of bringing in big wall breakers to break with your momentum, you want to continuously pivot, then what you really need to do is hazard stack, because what you're doing is you are not breaking a hole through your opponent with a Mega Glalie clicking explosion. Instead, what you're doing is you're forcing your opponent to switch and you're gradually chipping them down. Well, Flip Turn isn't doing that, so you need hazards up, because you more they force them to switch, the more they take from hazards. In a game with heavy duty boots, we can argue all day about how easy that is and how effective that is, but nevertheless, you need good hazard pressure if that's going to be your play style. And Rhydon being pretty much the only good rocker makes that tough. So again, like, the difference I would say with this team is the versatility of the setup options in Infernape. Infernape is one of these Pokemon, again, this is something that Strongfall spoke to me about many moons ago that I think is a really important thing to think about when you think about your teams. How well do the Pokemon on your draft beat their own checks? How versatile can they be? So Infernape and Blaziken are actually my 2 favorite examples. you know, I bring Blaziken to a game and you're worried like, oh man, my team just loses to Sword Stance, High Jump Kick, Flare Blitz Blaziken. I'm going to bring my Unaware Quagsire. That's fine, but if I hit you with a Power Herb Solar Beam, if I hit you with a... I think this thing gets Grass Knot, right? This doesn't, but Infernape does get the Grass Knot. If I hit you with a... I used to run Z a lot on Blaziken, which was really nice, but if I hit you with the Grass Knot after Nasty Plotting up, you know, oh, I'm super worried about Swords Dance Infernape sweeping me with Mach Punch. Well, actually, I'm Nasty Plot Grass Knot. I've now beaten the check that was meant for Infernape on my team. Keldeo, with the addition of Air Slash, got better at that, but it still does struggle to beat its own check. Scissor, definitely like a bulky Water or a bulky Steel. Yes, you can Swords Dance into Superpower, but then you're dropping your own defense, and if they've brought a Resist Berry, you might be dying, and you might not actually break through them. These are ones that struggle a little bit more with it than things like Infernape, I would say. So I think it's really about looking at your options for cleaning and breaking. Do you have, depending on how you want to play it, either you need hazards and you need to force a lot of momentum and wear them down with hazards, or you need to have versatile options to break through their own checks or to break through checks for other things that can then clean. If you're relying on 2 Pokemon to be your whole offensive core, I think you're going to struggle. That's my kind of analysis of this team. Moving on from that, I would say, you know, Drapion, decent T-Spike, who had some hazard pressure there. Definitely that's useful. T-Spikes tend to be harder to pressure an entire team with because there's various immunities, ways to soak them up. Things like Scizor and Keldeo can actually bring in poison types at different times, depending on how they're being played. You know, Keldeo clicking Fighting Stab might bring in a poison type. Something like a Moongus definitely springs to mind. This team actually wants Defog quite a lot because it does have things like Talonflame, which wants Defog going off, and or Beetle too. So yeah, and again, Scizor probably has been forced to Defog a few times this season. Maybe Drampa can take that role. Alchemy, I would say, is maybe the exception, but what I would have loved to see here is if I look through this team for like offensive cores, and I would say the traditional cores like Fighting Psychic Dark, which I love as a core, you can work around them if you understand draft well enough and if you build a good enough team. But if you're maybe not, if one of the most important things in Draft League is understanding your strengths and weaknesses. I personally am a pretty good player. I'll say that. I believe I'm a pretty good player. I'm a pretty horrific drafter, and knowing that is important. So if you aren't a great drafter, sometimes falling back on the classic team compositions isn't a bad thing, because maybe that will help you, and if you're a good enough player, it'll be fine. So for me, like, I've paired things like Keldeo, Latias, Tyranitar, or Latios, Tyranitar as a Fighting Psychic Dark core. Here it's kind of Drapion, which isn't that strong with base 90 attack, and Pursuit gone. Orbeetle, which is decently strong. Was it 80 special attack? Ugh. Calm Minding up in Stored Power. Maybe it's not a great offensive core. Fairy, Dragon, Steel, Scizor, Drampa, Alchemy. Ugh, Alchemy's not super strong. 110 base special attack. I suppose with Gigantamax is decent, but he hasn't got a boosting item on it. It's okay. It's okay. And Drampa's pretty decent, but again, if you want to get the most out of Drampa, you've got to either play Berserk very carefully, or you want to choice specs it a lot of the time, or Life Orbit, and then it's not going to have survivability, and it's going to be prediction reliant. So for me, I would say, like, looking at this team, I think he started off with really, really great synergy, but he didn't pair it with enough things that would support a particular play style, and that's where I think this team fell short. I will do one of these on one of my drafts at some point. I mean, I've already done a dissection of my EWT draft and stuff like that, so if you want to see me being critical of my own team, because I don't want to just seem like I'm hating on other people, I'm not at all, then go and check out my analysis of my EWT draft and what went wrong. But yeah, that's my kind of diagnosis of this team, is that I think it has individual good pieces. I look through this team, and there's not a Pokemon I don't like on it. I think every single one of these Pokemon is viable. I think they're all good, and that's a really good start. Like, there's not some random, you know, like, I've drafted things like Marini and stuff that are fine, but it's a Marini. There's nothing like that. It's a really, really thorough, like, solid throughout team. But the synergy for me for a specific play style is missing. It lacks the power to be offense, it lacks the hazard pressure to be just momentum, and it certainly doesn't have the bulk to be defensive. So yeah, I think that's my kind of my kind of summary of this team. I'm not going to harp on too long because I feel like this is cruel. I'm going to have to get used to recording these. Huge shout out to OG Albino. Go and check out his videos. I don't mean to sound mean at all. He's actually someone I have a ton of respect for, which is why I felt comfortable for doing this for his team as the first episode. Anyway, I'll be back with more of these if you liked this. As I say, if you want to send me teams that you'd recommend me look at, please do. But if they could be teams that are, you know, on YouTube somewhere, that would be even better, just because then you guys can go and right now watch the season that this was used in to see whether you agree with me, to see whether you think it played out the way that I'm describing. But hey ho, that's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you so much for loafing around with me, and I'll catch you again next time.